So, you want to buy Canadian? We're going to talk about that in a moment. This is Manitoba. I'm Marcy Marcusa. Thanks for joining the podcast. With talk of tariffs and trades, there are some people in our province and in the city of Winnipeg and the city of Brandon that are looking at what the impact might be if Donald Trump slaps Canada with a 25% tariff. What's that going to mean? So we have been asking a lot at CBC what you're thinking around this at the individual level. Like, are you actually going to be shopping differently as a person? You know, looking at the labels? I've asked that question repeatedly. One of our reporters actually met up with a woman in Brandon that said, absolutely, she is. So we're going to hear that on the podcast today. But we're not starting there. We're actually starting with a business that says that they're worried about being affected. And this ultimately might affect your morning cup of coffee. CBC's Jim Agapito spoke to a Winnipeg coffee roaster in the city about how he acquires his green coffee beans and how tariffs could affect his business.
And Brazil has challenges with... Hi, I'm Trevis Boyd from Black Pearl Coffee Roaster in Winnipeg. So what we do is we import and roast specialty, fair trade, and organic coffee. Well, for me, I mean, it's a legal addictive substance in the north end of Winnipeg, and right there is a bonus to it, okay? So for over 24 years, we've experienced a lot of it. But coffee has a long lineage. It's an adult beverage. It is access to being an adult. It's one of the most recognizable smells in the world. It's the second largest traded commodity next to sugar. So coffee is a global thing, and for us, we want our little teeny part of it to make perfect coffee.
The U.S. is possibly imposing tariffs. So I'm wondering, how would tariffs affect coffee around the world?
Well, around the world, tariffs with some of the coffee growing regions, export to the United States is a big thing. Colombia, as an example, was the most recent. They grow 12 to 14% of the world's coffee, and over 50% of their coffee goes directly to the United States. So any form of tariff with a high rate commodity like that would be very difficult for a country and other countries around the world as well.
Is it hard to get around using the United States?
Well, for instance, Cuba grows some spectacular coffee. Some of it does make its way to Canada, so it doesn't have to touch soil, but the largest broker houses in North America are East Coast, West Coast United States. And then the south would be New Orleans, for instance. So yeah, it would create an issue trying to go around it. Well, right out of the gate, if it happens, the first thing I'll notice is packaging for us. We use a specialty coffee bag that has a special bag, a special barrier. If Colombia, in fact, as one of the examples of the 12, 14 different coffees we get from different parts of the world, we would see that directly affect our green coffee purchasing as well.
Full pound or half pound today?
Now, from a consumer, some of the people that buy from you or other coffee shops around, maybe even Canada, how would that affect, your...
Well, it's a trickle down and trickle up effect. So unfortunately, if our green prices go up, our packaging prices go up, I have to share that with my clients. And in turn, those cafes and stores have to share that with their clients. So it works all the way down the pipeline. That's the way it is. You can only absorb so much. Now, coffee before the possible U.S. tariff issue, there's been a big rise in coffee over probably the last 18 months. And it's become a higher traded commodity, and that has driven the price, and not the farm and not the initial broker. It's how that coffee is traded globally.
Is that worrisome for you right now? Is this something that you're thinking as a business, How do I deal with this? Is this something that's on your mind right now?
Oh, it's on my mind all the time because I know it will affect my business. I mean, we're fortunate because we're well established. We're in our 24th year. As prices go up, it may change the number of clients I have, which would be unfortunate. But it is a fact of doing business, and either you ride it out or you make adjustments to it.
And that's the thing too. I noticed that you have employees here. How would that affect, say, having employees like the ones you have here?
Well, hopefully it won't affect my employees. I mean, eventually, of course, the cost of everything will go up. So if that's the driver, then either our coffee prices, retail and wholesale go up, or we reduce our employees, which is something I definitely do not want to do.
Now, Travis, I also know you've had experience living in the States. Mm-hmm. What do you think about the argument about bringing tariffs to tighten that up? I'm curious.
Well, it's kind of I think of course, the longest unprotected borders between Canada and the U.S., we're well aware of that. I don't think the problems coming out of Canada are as big as perhaps the problems coming out of the United States. That's just my opinion from what I've seen living in the U.S. and living in Canada. So I don't know. Will tariffs tighten up the border? I don't know. I think it creates fear, and fear creates reaction, and that might be the tightening up of the issue. A lot of Canadians go south of the border, a lot. A lot of them shop just south of the border. Think of those U.S. states and towns that may be affected by Canadians feeling uncomfortable going to the United States. I think that would be the short-term and long-term effect of border U.S. towns.
And do you think, buying Canadian, could it help to push back on U.S. tariffs?
Well, I think it could. Buying Canadian would help. But some of the stuff we're buying out of the U.S. is not made in the U.S. either. So we have to remember what buying Canadian means. It means Canadian produced, Canadian processed. Are we prepared to make those advancements? I would like to think we are. But buying out of the U.S., a lot of the goods we buy out of the U.S. are brought in offshore. As far as tariffs, I just want to remain a good neighbor. And I think there's ways of sorting it out.
So that is CBC's Jim Agapito, who was out speaking to Black Pearl owner Trevis Boyd about the possibility of these tariffs tomorrow and how they could impact his coffee business. And let's stay on this topic because as Donald Trump's reelection in the U.S., since he was reelected, we've been talking so much about tariffs. There's the ongoing threats, and those are compelling, obviously, businesses to respond, but also some Manitobans to think about at the individual level, how and where could you shop and change your habits. A woman in Brandon says that choosing Canadian products over American ones is her way of promoting and supporting Canadian culture and the local economy. And next on the show, CBC Manitoba reporter Rosanna Hempel is here to talk about how she met up with Maria Askham at her home in Brandon. And Maria walked her through all these efforts she's making. Hi.
Good morning.
So Maria's changing the way she shops. What does that mean?
That's right. Well, she's checking her grocery labels more closely when she's out shopping. So she told me that she's prioritizing Canadian and Manitoba products. And when she can't do that, because of course, we don't grow or produce everything here in Manitoba, Maria says she'll also look for alternatives from other countries. And sometimes she finds that products do have a Canadian flag or that signature maple leaf on the packaging that identifies them as made in Canada. And sometimes for her, it's a matter of reading the fine print. So Maria told me that she also plans and researches in advance if she can't find enough information on a product. And she'll also go to local shops like bakeries and butchers. So here's what she told me about what's motivating her to do that.
I just think that we need to see this as a very positive step, and that supporting local, supporting Canadian products is important for our economy, important for our culture, important for our country, because we're Canadian and we're an amazing country.
And it's also U.S. President Donald Trump's comments about Canada, including ones about Canada becoming a part of the U.S. and his ongoing tariff threats that are motivating her to support Canadian products.
So I'm not anti-American. I will buy American products if I find that they're better than something else I've used. But I am far more vigilant now.
So all in all, she told me she doesn't feel comfortable sitting back right now, and that being more selective in what she buys is something that she can do in her everyday life.
So we've been having, different aspects of looking at this all morning because tomorrow's the day. So Donald Trump threatened to hit us with these 25% tariffs, Canada and Mexico, February 1st, tomorrow. He was citing border security issues as one of the reasons. So there's lots of analysis on that today. I know, though, that you didn't just talk to your guest. You also dropped by a local bakery to see how some others were feeling. What did they tell you?
Yeah, so I went to Chez Angela Bakery and Cafe in Brandon, and they told me that, customers and staff are talking about buying local and what the tariffs and potential retaliatory tariffs could look like. The bakery's manager, James Chambers, says buying local was already a priority for them, even before Trump was reelected.
We actually have over 25 local growers and producers that we source everything from flour to coffee to fruit to meat from, and in that process, over 80 cents on every dollar stays right here in our province. We're really proud of that, but it's a lot of work.
James told me that it is a matter of building and keeping those relationships with growers and producers. And overall, it is about 20 to 30% more expensive to source those products locally. And as you heard there, it is a bit more work. But he says it's definitely doable. And for him, it's worthwhile for his community and for environmental reasons. And he says the food tastes better, too. So here's his message for anyone interested in buying more local.
There's a lot of really great resources out there. If you look for brand comparisons, U.S. source versus Canadian source, that's a really good start. But then check in with your local stores, those mom and pop shops that are owned locally. They've often already made an effort to find those relationships and are willing to help make those connections with you.
Now, he doesn't know exactly how any tariffs on Canadian goods would affect him or the people that he sources his food from. He's still in the process of figuring that out, and of course, it all hinges on whether these tariffs go ahead. The Brandon Chamber of Commerce says it is still a good opportunity for people to buy local and, put a bit more thought into what they spend their money on and where. The Chamber's president, Lois Rustin, agrees, though, that it can be a bit more complicated than we think.
That can be tricky, and certainly isn't that alone isn't going to address some of the significant impacts that these tariffs may have. But it's a great first step.
Just to sort of build on that, a lot of economists do say that buying Canadian is more complicated than consumers might assume. What more do you have to say about that? Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, so your listeners might remember hearing an economist from Ontario on this show earlier this week. Viet Vu is the manager of economic research at the DAIS, a public policy think tank at Toronto Metropolitan University. And he says breaking down where every single ingredient in a product is from can get complicated. And one of the easiest things people can do is to buy what's in season. So now with it being winter here, that might look like things like broccoli, leeks, potatoes, that kind of thing. And, if these tariffs go ahead, he says, as we've heard a lot of people say, that it would be devastating for the economy, but, he expects the market to adjust. And here's what he said that might look like.
You'll find that suppliers who are price sensitive will start pursuing trade or sourcing with other countries or getting stuff locally because those end up being cheaper. So it's not an ideal world that I'm painting here, but in a perverse way, buying locally will become easier because many producers will have no better choice.
Coming back to Maria Askham and Brandon, she feels that choosing Canadian and Manitoba products is what she can do right now, and she hopes others join her.
And they don't have to be big choices. You don't have to stand on a hill and wave our flag and say, no, Canada's not for sale. Just simple things by looking for Canadian products, buying local. Sometimes they're a little bit more expensive, but it's supporting our people, the people of our community, our farmers, and our workers.
And that's why she is spending a bit more time reading those grocery labels and researching an extra 10 or 15 minutes online.
Thanks for bringing this in. I know we've been asking for people if they're doing this, so it's really interesting to hear Maria already committing to it. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
That is CBC reporter Rosanna Hempel. Well, I am Marcy Marcuso with our team here at the CBC Podcast. This is Manitoba, and don't forget to like and share and also pitch us. I always throw out our CBC radio email for that, and that is radio893@cbc.ca.